So somebody asked when I came in tonight, what are the limits on what we could do politically as a synagogue? So let me just clarify that so everybody knows as we're going into this season. The only thing we're not allowed to do by our tax-exempt status is for anybody who's in this position to advocate who you should vote for. So I'm not saying anything about who you should vote for. And you won't hear that. That's a decision each of you has to make yourself. Now, many churches and synagogues come very close to saying that. You're allowed politically to discuss issues legally. You're allowed politically to talk about to prepare and to put out descriptions of what candidates are taking which positions, and then discuss those positions and take a position on those positions. But you can't say these words, vote for so-and-so. So just in case you were wondering what the limits are, those are the limits, just so you shouldn't worry, okay? Your tax-deductible contributions are safe. And I just want to say hello to all of those live streaming friends out there. We're very happy to have you with us tonight. And after services, as we are so thrilled with our new space and what it affords us here, we are going to begin now with programs during the Oneg time. Starting tonight, after you grab a cup of coffee, you're welcome to join me in the Rich Marin room, where I will take questions and discuss in greater detail things about what it was like to be at the Democratic Convention, and talk a little bit more about that in greater detail. So if you want to join me downstairs after you grab a cup of coffee, I'd very much look forward to you. And we will continue this going into the new year here in this new space of having Shabbat dinners, sometimes before, sometimes after services, and having speakers and conversations, and using the time after services for various things as well. So look for that. So as I mentioned earlier, today itself was Rosh Chodesh Av. Today was the beginning of the month of Av. Not Shabbat, but Friday. Thursday night and Friday was Rosh Chodesh. And with Rosh Chodesh, we begin an intensive period. If with the 17th of Tammuz, we began the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av. With Rosh Chodesh Av, we begin the 9 days leading up to Av. And you can imagine it's almost as if the texture of the days get a little bit more intense. So if the 3 weeks have a certain characteristic, the 9 days gets more intense. And this should sound familiar to you. We Jews like to anticipate holidays, to create times in which we go through a process so that when we arrive at a day of the holiday, it's not the first time we're encountering it. And this is a very profound part of the Jewish cycle of the year. And of course, in only a few days, we'll be starting that with Rosh Chodesh Elul, with the beginning of the month of Elul, which is the beginning of moving the 30 days towards Rosh Hashanah. And as any of you know who have gone through it, the earlier you start, the more meaningful the days of awe are. And if I might say, Tisha B'Av is in some ways even the beginning of the time leading into these days of awe. Now, you might say that's an extended period of preparation, and I can't argue with you, but as I often say, I hear it's true about things like preparing for a marathon. I don't know about this personally, or any other athletic goal you have. You cannot begin preparation the day before if you're going to be successful. You have to start sometimes with a very thin preparation, and it builds. So how is Rosh Chodesh Av and Tisha B'Av related, in fact, to the high holidays? Can you believe it? I'm back. It's the beginning of August, and I'm already talking about the high holidays. And this year, they are late. Rosh Hashanah is October 2nd, I think, or the 3rd. Am I correct? Something like that. It's in October. So they are late. So we should have a long time ago. And here I am in the middle of the summer saying we're actually beginning with this moment of preparation. So what is Tisha B'Av, which we will observe here at CBST Saturday nights, August 13th, I believe, is the English date. And we do it with darkened lights and with LED candles, because we can't have real candles in this space. And we recite the book of Lamentations, which is ironically maybe the most beautiful chanting there is to this very sad text. And we sing sad songs, and we have a kind of a kumsitz in the dark. So Av, what is Av about? What is Tisha B'Av about? Well, many people could say it's about the destruction of the temple. So let me review very quickly. Right, the people, the Israelites, were living in the land of Israel. Rome was the occupying force. And mostly Rome let its tribute nations live fairly peacefully as long as they were paying taxes and providing financial resources. The Roman Empire expanded by letting people live with a fair amount of freedom as long as they paid a lot of money. Taxes were very important and paid a certain level of tribute to the Roman gods. But as you know from the story, and I won't go through it, and we have it from a very passionate first-person perspective, the Romans, for various reasons, started suspecting the Israelites of being rebellious and slowly started imposing various regulations to limit those freedoms. I won't go through the various historical pieces of it. They're pretty fascinating, and I'm a lover of history. But let's jump to the 17th of Tammuz. The Romans came into Jerusalem from the north, and if you know Jerusalem well, you know the south part of the city is on a steep hill. The city is always attacked from the north because it's the easiest to access, and the Romans came through the north and broke through the fortress in the north. And there were 4 groups of Israelites inside of Jerusalem, which was the last stronghold. 4 groups, history tells us, according to Josephus. There were the rabbinic category, also known as the Pharisees. There were the Sadducees, which were the class of people that were by and large associated with the temple and the priestly clan of the temple. There were the Zealots, those who were advocating fighting the Roman occupying force. And there were the Sicari, which was the Roman word for dagger. They were a category of fighters. If the Zealots attacked the Roman invaders and did acts of, one would have to say, terrorism against the Romans, the Sicari, by and large, attacked fellow Israelites who they accused of being collaborators or too moderate. So they were known to go throughout the city of Jerusalem, the back streets and in the little alleys with knives, and they would attack people and kill them in the street that they accused of being too moderate. The moderates were by and large the rabbis, the rabbinic class who advocated trying to find a way to live with the occupying power of the Romans, considering they felt there was no way to succeed. Everybody following this history lesson so far? 4 groups. Then the Romans decided to lay a siege on the city, which the Israelites had prepared for by creating a warehouse of foods that would last for 21 years, they said. The Sicari, however, burned the warehouse of food because they didn't want there to be this long, they wanted there to be a revolution, a rebellion. And so the starving Israelites were faced with a pretty radical problem, how to survive. This we know very well. This story is well known. If you study anything about Jewish history, this is a very, very famous story. If you study anything about Roman history, it's a tiny little blip on the screen, because guess what? The Romans weren't so interested in this tiny little people. And the famous story is told of Yochanan ben Zakkai, the rabbi, right? And what was his response to this crisis that was happening? What? Give me Yavna. He snuck out of the sieged city, and he went to the Vespasian, who was the commander, and said to him, "You are going to be emperor." Vespasian said, "That's ridiculous, I'm just the commander." And just at the moment that Yochanan ben Zakkai was in the room with him, a courier came from Rome and said, "Guess what? Nero just died, you're the emperor." Vespasian looked at Yochanan ben Zakkai and said, "You are a prophet. You're clearly, God's presence is with you. I'll give you anything you want." And what did he ask for? With all these Israelites under siege in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem about to be destroyed, and the temple about to be destroyed, which is what we're about to observe, he said, "Give me Yavna." He said, "Give me a town for myself and for my students, and there I will build a school." And this military commander, who's now the emperor of Rome, said, "That's what you want? You want Yavna, which is a small town, and you just want to take a few of your students?" And he did. He gave it to him. And the Talmud, by the way, has very famous debates about whether this was a wise request. Shouldn't he have asked for Jerusalem? Shouldn't he have asked for the temple? Was that a good, what would you have done kind of story? Vespasian's son, Titus, took over for him. And we know, if you've been to Rome, you know Titus's arch has the famous vision of the menorah and all of the slaves being taken out of Jerusalem to Rome. And it's how we even know what the menorah looks like. The best visual image we have of the menorah in the temple is on that arch in Rome. Who's been there and seen it in person? Pretty profound, very moving. And of course, we know that hundreds of thousands, perhaps, of Israelites were marched as slaves from Jerusalem to Rome. Coming into the city of Rome, can you imagine what it was like for the Roman Jewish community, which had been there for hundreds of years, to see fellow Jews being marched in as slaves? They were able to buy the freedom for some of them, but not for most. And we know historically from Roman history that many of those Jewish slaves built the Colosseum. That was the moment in historical time. It was Jewish slaves brought from Jerusalem. Jerusalem was then destroyed. As we observe on the night of the 8th of Av, going into the 9th of Av and into the 10th of Av, the breach happened on the 17th of Tammuz. 3 weeks later, the siege collapsed the walls around the temple itself, and then the temple went up into flames. And just so we don't think of this just as a vague historical moment, I read you a description of that time. A terrible hunger ravaged the overcrowded city. In Josephus's account, the roofs were filled with women and small children dying from hunger. The corpses of old men were piled in the streets. Young men swollen with hunger wandered like shadows in the marketplace till they collapsed. No one mourned the dead because hunger had deadened all feeling. Those who fell to the ground turned their eyes for the last time to the holy temple and watched the defenders fighting and holding out. The streets were soon filled with corpses, and as it was hot summer weather, terrible epidemics broke out. Hundreds of people were found dead every morning. In their despair, many of the Jews tried to leave the enclosure of Jerusalem under the cover of night to seek something edible in the fields. They were easily captured, and Titus had them crucified in plain view of the city's defenders on the wall. In one night, Josephus tells us, 5,000 Jews were discovered searching for food, and all were crucified. So the vision of this destruction is real. It's not just a vague sepia-toned image. And the temple was destroyed. We know what happened next. The diaspora, which produced all of us, then ensued. The Talmud, which is 300 to 500 years later, asks this question: why was the temple destroyed? Why did all this happen? And unlike so much of the politics of our moment, which is so focused when anything terrible happens on who else to blame, on how to find a scapegoat outside of whoever is asking the question to blame. Isn't that the kind of the meme of our time? Everybody is pointing a finger at somebody else. In the Talmud, the question is asked, who is to blame for this horrific destruction and exile of our people and the destruction of this most sacred of holy places? And of course, the Romans were the agents, but according to the Talmud, there is only one reason for that destruction, and that is sinat chinam, baseless hatred among the Jews. That's remarkable. Think about that. The Talmud, which is only a couple of hundred years later and has people who are writing it who lived through it in the time of the Mishnah and are saying the Romans were simply agents of the disease we allowed into the very fabric of our society. They were, in fact, agents of God. We were at fault. This wasn't just a blame the victim thing. This was a question of how do we learn from history in order to reconstruct the society we will build in exile. And the rabbis point to those 4 different groups that I described and the hatred among them, and that the Jews who ran around the city of Jerusalem killing other Jews who were not perceived to be the right kind of Jews, that created disease at the base of society that allowed for, in the rabbi's mind, the Roman destruction of the temple. So what we mourn when we talk about the destruction of the temple, we don't focus on the enemy who did it to us. As Jews, the mourning is a part about what do we do to ourselves. How do we create the conditions in which we allow for hatred to flourish? It's never a situation only of an evil man like Hitler that arises and somehow arouses the people to violence and to hatred. There has to be fertile ground in which fascism and hatred can take root. And the rabbis were the first to say, sinat chinam, baseless, unconditional hatred, is the source of the destruction. So while we sit in these moments of leading up to Tisha B'Av and the mourning of the destruction, it's not so far from what we have to mourn ourselves today, because it's asking us, what are the ways in which we contribute to creating cracks in our world in which hatred can flourish? That's the destruction of these 3 weeks that demands of us to be self-reflective. So, how is this connected to the high holy days, to these days of awe? That we have to go into this depth of self-reflection, of really looking at anything and every way that we as a society, we as individuals have contributed to this. Obviously, that's a theme that relates. But it's not only that. What did Yochanan ben Zakkai do when he got Yavna? What did he do with Yavna? Yavna became a school. He understood that the future of the Jewish people was not going to be in a particular geography of that moment. The Romans were just too powerful. But if there were Jews who were committed to Judaism, wherever we were exiled, Judaism would live. The second thing is, there is a tradition that the Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. What does that mean? So not just, let's say we believe in an individual Mashiach, or we believe the idea of a messianic age, that it's in the roots of complete destruction, of total despair, that redemption can emerge. The phoenix rises out of the dust. That concept is so deeply Jewish that it is in the midst of really bottoming out, so to speak, as a society. You can't get any worse than what happened in Jerusalem in the year 70. So the potential for redemption is born right at the moment of destruction. And what are the final words of Eicha? Does anybody remember what the final words of the book of Lamentation? We end after we've gone into this deep place of destruction, this place in which we are not just mourning what others have done to us. That's not what Tisha B'Av is about. It's not about what Romans have done to us. The rabbis make it clear what Tisha B'Av is about is what do we do to make it possible for the Romans, so to speak, to destroy us? That's a very profound question. And the book of Lamentations of Tisha B'Av, this book that is so profound in its delving into our sadness, ends with these words: Hashivenu Adonai Elecha. Return us, O God, to you. V'nashuva, and we will return. Chadesh Yamenu Kikedem. Renew us as in those days of old. And when do we sing those words here at CBST? Throughout the days of awe. When are they found? Throughout the days of awe. They bring us all the way from Tisha B'Av to Slichot, right into Kol Nidre. So please, God, help all of us who are in this room, help all of us who are in this season of destruction, know that redemption comes in the very deepest moments of despair and of destruction. And help us move through the destruction, becoming deeply self-conscious of the ways we participate in it. But know that redemption comes right from those moments. Please join us. Larry, would you join us? Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'nashuva. Please, God, help us return to you and we will return.
Hashivenu